Okay, well, welcome back. Still reading Chapter 2, The Imprints of Experience in Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology book. Get right into it. But in this section of the present chapter, the chief concern is not the problem of universals, to which the following section returns, but the local, geographically and historically conditioned, various manners of rendering and applying those general themes. And even the brief view already given of the spectrum of the myth of the primordial androgynous giant suffices to afford a preliminary notion of the ways in which one common image can be turned to differing ends. We observe, for example, that whereas in the Greek and Hebrew versions man is split in two by a god, in the Chinese, Hindu, and Australian, it is the god itself who divides and multiplies. In the Hindu version, furthermore, the image of the androgynous ancestor is developed in terms of an essentially psychological reading of the problem of creation. The universal self becomes divided immediately after conceiving and uttering the pronoun I, Sanskrit aham. This illustrates the fundamental Indian conviction that a sense of ego is the root of the world illusion. Ego generates fear and desire, and these are the passions that animate all life and even all being. For it is only after the concept I has been established that the fear of one's own destruction can develop, or any desire for personal enjoyment. The aim of Indian yoga, therefore, is to clear the mind of the concept I, and therewith dissolve both fear and desire. But this amounts to an undoing of creation, or at least of one's psychological participation in its effects. For it leads not only to the knowledge that the seat of anxiety and sorrow is ego, but also to a level of immediate experience antecedent to all thought, where there is neither hope nor fear, but only the rapture of a sheer and mere consciousness of being. In the Hebrew version, on the other hand, the image of the primordial androgyne has been applied to a theological reading of the mystery of creation, culminating in a concept of the Jewish people as the agents of God's will, following the failure and disobedience of the divided androgyne in the garden. To maintain the tension between God and man, the Creator is in this mythology held aloof from his creation. It is not the God who falls into a state of exile from his own true nature, but rather his creature, and the exile is not an essentially psychological one, antecedent to and inherent in the concept of the manifold of the universe, but a concrete historical episode occurring in a world already created by a transcendent but not immanent Lord God and universal disciplinarian. Finally, in the Greek allegory of Plato, the same basic theme has been applied poetically, to give point to a genial metaphorical interpretation of the mystery of human love, its trials, depth, and delight. And it is worth observing that though the gods are here represented as in a certain sense superior to the beings whom they divide, in a second ironical sense, it is the human beings who are in their love superior. The jealous gods divided them out of fear of their strength. If we now allow all three of these versions, the Hindu, the Hebrew, and the Greek, to supplement and play against one another in our minds, we shall certainly find it difficult to believe that they have not been derived from a single common tradition. And this probability becomes even more confounding and amazing when the primitive Australian example is considered in relation to the rest. The circumcised boy initiate, embracing the living tree that rises from the head of the first ancestor, before being lanced and therewith identified with the father. Who is he? In this science, we must have the courage to compare. So let us not be afraid to draw the obvious parallel, though we may not yet be ready to understand why it should be possible, with Jesus on the cross that rises on the hill of the skull of the first ancestor, whose whose side is to be opened by a lance in the awesome rite of his at-one-ment with the Father. There can be little doubt that there is a common tradition back of all these myths. It is, however, the one and only mythological tradition of our species, so that we may expect to find that its themes and motifs have been coextensive. Is it, however, the one and only mythological tradition of our species, so that we may expect to find that its themes and motifs have been coextensive with human thought? If so, then perhaps we should accept without further ado Bastian's theory of the elementary and ethnic ideas. But if it should appear, on the other hand, that this mythological tradition, though broadly diffused and of prodigious import, is but one of many, or even one of two, completely disparate traditions, then we must inquire when and where it may have originated and what experiences or insights can have brought it forth. Likewise, when and where the other traditions originated, and from what different experiences or insights. Furthermore, with respect to this particular mythology, are we to think of it as having been diffused at some remote but determinable period of the past, from the centers of a higher civilization to Australia, where on flinty soil a regressive metamorphosis reduced the imagery to its present form? Or did a reverse process take place, the material being sublimated from its primitive to the higher forms through centuries of progressive transformation? Or does it represent rather, as some of the leading theological students of the problem have suggested, the vestiges of a primitive revelation vouchsafed to man at the commencement of his career on earth? An early theory of this kind was proposed in the first part of the 19th century by the Romantic philosopher Friedrich W. J. von Schelling (1775 to 1854), who claimed that man was created in the center of Godhead, where he beheld all things as they are in God, which is to say, in terms of their essential order. And in this view there was no room or need for myth. But when man had moved from this center to the periphery, his unity in the center being gone, his vision was no longer superior to things, for he had sunk to the level of being a mere thing himself, and it was on this level that the various polytheistic mythologies arose as uncentered man's dreams of his own lost state of being. Schelling believed, however, that man's original unity in God had been imperfect, since in this state he had not yet had the experience of testing his own freedom. Hence the polytheistic mythologies represent a stage, or rather series of stages, in a historical progress toward the manifestation of the second Adam, in the ultimate religion of Christ. In the heathen religions, Christ is implicit, in the Old Testament prophesied, and in the New Testament revealed. Thus Christianity is innate in human life and as old as the world. Such an idea could have been developed from a reading of certain passages of the early Church Fathers, for example, Tertullian's statement, circa 160 to 230 AD, that the soul is naturally Christian, anima naturaliter Christiana. But Schelling might have developed his thought independently, for the phenomenology that gave rise to Bastian's theory of elementary ideas has been observed by many throughout the history of the intercourse of the races. Analogies, even minute analogies, exist far too numerously between the mythological traditions of the higher and lower cultures to be dismissed as the mere fall of chance, and those weaving a net of common strands between the Christian liturgy and such barbarous rites as those of our severely shaken Aranda lads are particularly strong. Let us return, therefore, to the mystery of their resurrection, and we'll do that in the next video reading. Thanks for joining me. Have a good day.